The air in the boardroom was thick with tension. I sat there, alone, at the polished mahogany table, eyes of shareholders drilling into me like I was a failure waiting to happen. My boss, Jonathan Mercer, had just stepped out to handle something urgent, leaving me to present the quarterly expansion strategy to an audience of multimillionaires, with no support, no materials, and no warning. He wanted me to choke. He wanted them to see me unravel. I clutched the empty folder he'd handed me minutes earlier, my fingernails digging into the leather as I fought to maintain my composure. 5 years at Ascendera Group had taught me one thing: never let them see you sweat. "Ms. Price," drawled Richard Keller, one of our oldest investors, checking his Rolex with exaggerated impatience. "Perhaps we should reschedule if Mr. Mercer is indisposed." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. I was just Jonathan's subordinate, the competent but ultimately replaceable Samantha Price, strategy manager who existed to make others look good. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Keller," I replied, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. "I'm fully prepared to present our global expansion strategy." A lie. A complete and utter lie. I had created the strategy, yes, poured my soul into every projection, every market analysis, but Jonathan had deliberately kept me in the dark about this meeting until last night. The presentation materials were nowhere to be found. This was sabotage, plain and simple. 8 men and 2 women stared back at me, faces ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Atlanta's gleaming skyline stretched behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows, the September sun casting long shadows across the 64th floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could see for miles from this height, yet my career vision extended only as far as the man determined to keep me invisible. I stood, smoothed my charcoal pencil skirt, and approached the digital display. The screen glowed blue, waiting for input I didn't have. Desperation clawed at my throat as I reached for my phone, hoping against hope that I had a backup of the presentation somewhere. "Perhaps Jonathan was correct about you after all," murmured Eliza Dougherty, the firm's oldest board member. "All these years I wondered if you were being held back." My cheeks burned. 5 years of 4 a.m. strategy sessions, of canceled vacations and missed family funerals, all for moments like this. Moments Jonathan ensured would never showcase my true abilities. The double doors swung open. Relief flooded through me, until I realized it wasn't Jonathan returning to rescue me from his own trap. Instead, Mr. Lars Lindgren, the stoic Swedish investor who controlled 23% of our shares, entered the room silently. His icy blue eyes scanned the space and landed on me. The room stilled. Lars Lindgren was legendary in our industry, brilliant, formidable, and notoriously difficult to impress. He rarely attended these quarterly meetings in person, preferring to join remotely from Stockholm. Yet here he stood, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit, his silver hair precisely cut. And then he smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, in perfect English, "before we continue, I have an announcement." He walked over to me, extended his hand, and said calmly, "Ascendera's newest executive director of global strategy is already here, Ms. Samantha Price, effective immediately." You could hear the room freeze. Jonathan Mercer was halfway through the door and visibly turned to stone. It was over. Not just his little power game, but his reign of quiet sabotage, public humiliation, and backdoor politics. "I don't understand," stammered CEO David Harrington, rising from his seat. "The board hasn't approved." "The International Investment Committee has," Lars interrupted, his voice gentle but leaving no room for debate. "We've been monitoring the situation closely, very closely." With practiced precision, Lars withdrew a tablet from his briefcase and projected a familiar document onto the main screen. It was my expansion strategy, the original version with my name still watermarked in the corner. "This plan," he continued, "impressed our European partners significantly. Ms. Price's approach to scaling our North American logistics model internationally is both innovative and fiscally responsible." I stared at the screen in disbelief. 3 weeks ago, I'd shared this document with Lars during an unexpected Zoom meeting he'd requested. I never imagined he'd been evaluating me for a promotion I didn't even know existed. Jonathan finally found his voice. "There must be some misunderstanding. Samantha works under my direct supervision, and I can assure you she's not ready for director-level responsibility." Lars's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain why the quarterly numbers she generated, which you presented as your own last month, outperformed projections by 17%. The silence was deafening. Board members exchanged glances, connecting dots I'd never had the power to illuminate. Or why? Lars continued. The Atlanta restructuring plan bearing your signature perfectly matches Ms. Price's draft submitted 3 months earlier? The draft you reportedly rejected as fundamentally flawed? Jonathan's face drained of color. I suddenly understood the extent of Lars's investigation. He hadn't just reviewed my work. He'd uncovered the systematic pattern of theft and suppression that had defined my career. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. The truth had finally emerged, not through my complaints or bitterness, but through the quality of my work. Ms. Price, Lars said, turning to me, I believe you were about to present the global strategy. Please continue. With steady hands, I navigated to the presentation I'd created but never expected to deliver. As the familiar slides appeared, I found my voice, strong, clear, and finally, truly mine. Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to present Ascendera's Global Expansion Initiative for the coming fiscal year. I spoke for 45 minutes, walking the board through market analyses, logistics innovations, and projected growth curves. Questions came, sharp, probing inquiries that I answered with the depth of knowledge that comes from owning every aspect of a strategy. Jonathan remained frozen by the door, watching his carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. When I finished, David Harrington was the first to speak. Well, he said, clearing his throat, it seems we have some adjustments to make to our organizational chart. He glanced at Jonathan, then back at me. Congratulations, Ms. Price, or should I say Director Price? The words hung in the air, sweeter than I'd ever imagined, yet somehow different from the victory I'd dreamed of during countless nights of unacknowledged work. This wasn't about defeating Jonathan. It was about finally being seen. The first week after my promotion passed in a blur of congratulatory emails, hasty office, relocations, and the distinct pleasure of watching Jonathan Mercer clean out his desk. He resigned 3 days after the shareholders' meeting, citing personal reasons in a company-wide email that carefully avoided mentioning my name or new position. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My new office, a corner space on the executive floor with windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, felt surreal. For 5 years, I'd worked in a windowless interior office, the kind reserved for people not important enough to impress clients or colleagues. Now, sunlight streamed across my desk each morning, illuminating the framed certificates and awards I'd kept hidden in drawers for too long. You should hang that MBA diploma somewhere more prominent, said a familiar voice from my doorway. I looked up to find Tara Williams, my former cubicle neighbor and one of the few allies I'd had in the strategy department. She leaned against the doorframe, 2 coffee cups in hand. Still take it with oat milk and too much cinnamon? She asked, extending one toward me. Some things never change, I replied, accepting the offering gratefully. How's the 7th floor treating you? Better, now that Mercer's gone. It's like someone opened a window in a room that's been stuffy for years. She settled into one of my visitor chairs, real leather, not the cracked pleather of my previous life. Everyone's talking about what happened in that meeting. Some say you orchestrated the whole thing. I nearly choked on my coffee. Orchestrated? I showed up expecting humiliation, not promotion, which makes it even better. Tara's dark eyes sparkled with amusement. You know how corporate mythology works. By next month, they'll be saying you hired Lars Lindgren yourself. We laughed, but the mention of Lars sobered me. I still didn't fully understand why the reserved Swedish investor had taken such interest in my career. Our 3-week-old Zoom meeting had seemed straightforward. He'd asked questions. I'd answered honestly. Nothing that should have led to a boardroom coup. Speaking of myths, Tara continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, did you hear about the HR investigation? I raised an eyebrow. What investigation? They're doing a full review of complaints filed against Mercer over the past 7 years. Turns out you weren't his only target. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow it did. I'd spent so long feeling singularly persecuted that I'd never considered there might be others suffering silently alongside me. How many? I asked quietly. 7 women so far. 2 left the company. 1 transferred to our Singapore office just to get away from him. Tara studied my face. You really didn't know? I shook my head, a familiar guilt tightening my chest. I was so focused on surviving my own situation that I never looked around to see who else might be drowning. That's exactly how men like Mercer operate, Sam. They isolate their targets, make each one feel alone. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a notification. Lars Lindgren was requesting a video call in 5 minutes. Duty calls, I said, standing. The International Investment Committee waits for no woman. Tara rose too, but paused at the door. Just remember, you earned this. Not because someone rescued you, but because you were too good to ignore forever. After she left, I straightened my blazer and prepared my desk for the video call. When Lars's face appeared on my screen, he looked as composed as ever. Stockholm's gray autumn light filtering through what appeared to be a home office behind him. "Director Price," he greeted me, a hint of warmth in his usually stoic expression. "How are you settling into your new role?" "Still adjusting, Mr. Lindgren, but grateful for the opportunity." He nodded approvingly. "I've reviewed the team assignments you've proposed. Promoting Ms. Chen and Ms. Rodriguez was an excellent decision. I'd spent the weekend reorganizing my department, elevating 2 brilliant analysts who had also languished under Jonathan's leadership. Both women had thanked me through tears. Not the reaction you expect from a standard promotion. "They've earned their positions many times over," I replied. "I'm just correcting a long-standing oversight. And that is precisely why the committee chose you, Ms. Price." Lars leaned forward slightly. "You understand that leadership isn't about personal power. It's about recognizing potential in others." A question had been burning inside me for days. Finally, I found the courage to ask it. "Mr. Lindgren, why did you request that meeting with me 3 weeks ago? How did you even know to look in my direction?" He considered me for a moment, then answered carefully. "Last quarter, I noticed discrepancies between Asundara's internal strategy documents and the public presentations. The numbers aligned, but the thinking behind them, the fundamental approach, shifted dramatically between drafts. 2 distinct minds were at work, yet only one name appeared in the final versions. So you investigated." I made inquiries. Discreetly. His expression remained neutral, but something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. When patterns of theft become this consistent, they eventually become visible from a distance. I processed this quietly, imagining Lars Lindgren, 24% shareholder and legendary venture capitalist, piecing together the evidence of my silent contributions over years of quarterly reports. "Thank you," I said finally. "Not just for the promotion, but for seeing what others chose to ignore. I'm a businessman, Ms. Price. I notice when talent is being wasted." He glanced at his watch. "Now, shall we discuss the European market entry timeline? I have some concerns about your projections for the German logistics hub." And just like that, we were back to business. The rest of the call focused on strategic details and implementation. Challenges. The comfortable territory of numbers and forecasts rather than office politics and personal vindication. After we ended the call, I stood by my window, watching Atlanta's midday traffic flow beneath me. For 5 years, I'd imagined this moment, being recognized, vindicated, elevated to where I belonged. In my daydreams, triumph had tasted sweeter, more like revenge. The reality was different, more complex, more meaningful. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Kate. "Dinner tonight to celebrate? Mom's dying to hear all about your new fancy title." I smiled and texted back, 7 p.m., I'll bring the champagne. As I returned to my desk, an email notification appeared. A company-wide announcement from HR about mandatory ethical leadership training for all managers, effective immediately. The first small ripple of change. Not the last, if I had anything to say about it. 3 months into my role as Executive Director of Global Strategy, I still occasionally opened my office door expecting to find myself back in the windowless cubicle on the 7th floor. The transition hadn't been seamless. Nothing worth having ever is. Some of Jonathan's loyalists remained, watching. Me with thinly veiled skepticism, waiting for me to falter under the weight of responsibility he'd always insisted I couldn't handle. I didn't give them the satisfaction. December brought Atlanta an unusual dusting of snow and Asundara its strongest fourth-quarter performance in 8 years. The European expansion was progressing ahead of schedule, with our new Berlin office already securing 2 major logistics contracts. The corporate atmosphere had shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably, as if the building itself could breathe more easily without Jonathan's oppressive presence. "Director Price, you have a visitor." My assistant, Marcus, stood in the doorway. I'd hired him from the intern pool after noticing how he quietly helped others navigate our complex financial software without taking credit. Jonathan would have called it weakness. I recognized it as the kind of leadership that doesn't need a spotlight. "I don't have any meetings scheduled until 2, I replied. glancing at my calendar. It's not on the schedule. He hesitated, lowering his voice. It's Mr. Mercer. The name hit me like a cold wave. I'd heard rumors that Jonathan had landed at Horizon Partners, a smaller firm across town that competed with us in the logistics consulting space. But we hadn't spoken since the day he'd cleared out his office, avoiding my gaze as he carried his personal items to the elevator. "Send him in," I said, surprised by my own steadiness. Jonathan Mercer entered my office like a man walking into unfamiliar territory. He'd lost weight, and his usually impeccable appearance seemed slightly disheveled, his tie fractionally askew, his shoes less brilliantly polished. The sight brought me no pleasure. "Samantha," he nodded, remaining standing despite the chairs available. "Your assistant is very protective. Almost didn't let me through." "Marcus is good at his job," I replied neutrally. "What can I do for you, Jonathan?" He studied me, perhaps searching for gloating or resentment. Finding neither, he seemed momentarily disarmed. "I hear the Berlin expansion is exceeding projections." His tone was casual, but his eyes betrayed his purpose. He was fishing for information. "We're pleased with the progress." I kept my response deliberately vague, but somehow I doubt you came by to discuss our European strategy. A flash of the old Jonathan, impatient, slightly contemptuous, crossed his face before he regained control. Direct as always. "Fine. I'm here because Horizon is preparing a bid for the transatlantic shipping contract, and I know Ascendara is too." The transatlantic deal was potentially worth over $200 million. Exactly the kind of high-profile contract that could cement my leadership reputation, or conversely, damage it if lost. Of course, Jonathan would target it. "That's confidential information," I said carefully. "Not to anyone who knows how this company operates." He smiled thinly. "I built half the bidding templates Ascendara still uses. And yet here you are, on the outside looking in." The barb landed. His expression hardened. "I came to propose something mutually beneficial. A collaboration rather than competition. Horizon has connections with the European regulatory bodies that Ascendara lacks. You have the infrastructure already in place that we're still building. You want us to split the contract." I leaned back in my chair, understanding dawning. That's quite a proposal from someone who spent years ensuring I couldn't even present my own work. Business isn't personal, Samantha. You know that. The audacity nearly made me laugh. "Everything you did was personal, Jonathan. Every credit stolen, every promotion blocked, every time you sent me to get coffee during executive meetings when I should have been presenting. And look where you are now." He gestured around the office. Executive floor, corner office, direct line to Lars Lindgren himself. "You won, Samantha. What more do you want?" His question hung in the air between us. What did I want? Revenge? An apology? Neither seemed sufficient for the years of systematic undermining I'd endured. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "And I want you to know that Ascendara will be bidding on the transatlantic contract, the full contract, with a strategy I've personally developed. May the best company win." His face flushed. "You're making a mistake. Horizon has—" "Goodbye, Jonathan." I turned to my computer, a dismissal he couldn't misinterpret. He stood still for a moment longer, then left without another word. After the door closed, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled up the transatlantic file, reviewing the strategy I'd been refining for weeks. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I answered, more confidently than I felt. "But I need to move some meetings. The transatlantic bid just became our top priority." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of strategy sessions, late nights, and an intensity that reminded me why I'd chosen this career in the first place. The team rallied around the bid, especially Marisa Chen and Daniela Rodriguez, the two analysts I'd promoted, who brought fresh perspectives I would have missed alone. On the morning of the final presentation to Transatlantic's selection committee, Tara caught me in the elevator. "Heard Mercer's leading Horizon's pitch team," she said, studying my reaction. "Are you ready for that?" The question gave me pause. Was I ready to face Jonathan across a boardroom table, this time as equals competing for the same prize? "I'm not competing with Jonathan," I replied, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "I'm presenting the best possible strategy for Transatlantic's needs. That's all that matters." The presentation room at Transatlantic's headquarters hummed with quiet tension. 6 companies would pitch today, each allocated 90 minutes to convince the selection committee. Horizon Partners was scheduled immediately before Ascendara, Jonathan's final attempt to unsettle me. As Horizon's team exited, Jonathan caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. I couldn't tell if it was a gesture of respect or a warning, but it didn't matter. I led my team into the room with confidence built not from arrogance but preparation. "Good afternoon," I began, facing the committee of 7 executives. "I'm Samantha Price, Executive Director of Global Strategy at Ascendera Group. Today we're presenting not just a bid, but a partnership framework that will transform Transatlantic's European market position." The presentation flowed smoothly, each team member delivering their section with precision. When questions came, pointed, technical challenges that revealed the committee's deep understanding of their business, we answered without hesitation. This wasn't just my strategy. It was our collective best thinking, refined through dozens of iterations. As we concluded, Transatlantic's CEO, Elena Vasquez, asked the final question. "Ms. Price, your proposal includes a risk-sharing model we haven't seen from other bidders. Why should we consider an approach that potentially reduces your company's guaranteed profits?" I met her gaze directly. "Because we're not interested in extracting maximum value from a one-time transaction. We're proposing a framework for sustainable growth that benefits both companies equally. When you succeed, we succeed. Proportionally and transparently." She studied me thoughtfully, then nodded. "Thank you for your time. We'll announce our decision within 2 weeks." Outside, Atlanta's winter sun was already setting as we returned to Ascendara. The team dispersed to their offices, but I found myself drawn to the building's rooftop garden, a quiet space I discovered during particularly stressful days. The city lights stretched beneath me, a carpet of illumination against the darkening sky. I'd come so far from that humiliating day in the boardroom, yet something still felt unresolved. My phone vibrated with a text from Lars. "Heard the presentation went well. Regardless of outcome, proud of the direction you're taking the department." I smiled, typing back my thanks. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I realized what felt unfinished. For years, my career had been defined in opposition to Jonathan, proving him wrong, surviving his sabotage, eventually replacing him. Now I needed to define success on my own terms, whether we won this contract or not. The real victory wasn't outperforming Jonathan Mercer. It was becoming the kind of leader I'd always wished I had. The transatlantic contract came to Ascendera on a gray Tuesday morning in January. The email arrived with little fanfare, just a formal notification from Elena Vasquez, followed by attached documents requiring signatures. No explanation for their choice, no dramatic moment of victory. Business, unlike Hollywood, rarely provides satisfying final scenes. The office celebrated appropriately, champagne in the conference room, congratulatory emails from the executive team, a brief acknowledgement from David Harrington that the bid exceeded expectations. I made sure every team member received recognition, especially Marisa and Daniela, whose innovative risk-sharing model had ultimately swayed the decision. That evening, I left the office later than usual, having stayed to finalize the implementation timeline. The elevator doors were closing when a hand shot through, stopping them. Lars Lindgren stepped in, looking characteristically composed despite the late hour. "Mr. Lindgren," I said, surprised. "I didn't know you were in Atlanta." "Just arrived this afternoon." He pressed the lobby button. "The quarterly board meeting is tomorrow, as you know." I did know. In fact, I'd spent much of the past week preparing my first formal presentation to the board as executive director. "Congratulations on the transatlantic contract," he continued as the elevator descended. "Particularly impressive considering the competition." "Thank you. It was a team effort." "Indeed." His blue eyes assessed me carefully. "I heard Jonathan Mercer personally led Horizon's bid team. That must have been satisfying." The elevator stopped at the 30th floor, admitting 2 tired-looking accountants who immediately fell silent in Lars's presence. We resumed our descent in awkward quiet until they exited 10 floors later. "It wasn't about satisfaction," I said once we were alone again, answering his earlier observation. "It was about presenting the best possible solution for the client." Lars nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "Precisely why you're succeeding where Mercer failed. He always made business personal. His personal advancement, his personal vendettas." The elevator reached the lobby, its doors opening to the marble-floored expanse that marked the boundary between Ascendara's world and everything beyond. "Would you join me for dinner, Ms. Price?" Lars asked unexpectedly. "There are matters I'd like to discuss before tomorrow's board meeting." 20 minutes later, we were seated in a quiet corner of Atlas, an upscale restaurant in Buckhead where the lighting was dim enough for privacy, but bright enough to read the menu without squinting. Lars ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir without consulting me, a small reminder of the power dynamics still at play despite my new title. "You've accomplished much in 3 months," he said after the wine was poured. "The Ethical Leadership Initiative, the reorganization of the strategy team, and now the transatlantic contract. The board is impressed. I appreciate that." I took a small sip of wine, waiting for the other shoe to drop. In my experience, praise from powerful men often came with caveats. "However," he continued, right on cue, "there are concerns about your approach to the Asian market. Expansion." There it was. The Asian strategy had been my one significant deviation from the playbook Lars and the International Committee expected. Instead of focusing on China and Japan, the obvious targets, I'd proposed a concentrated effort in Vietnam and Malaysia, markets I believed were undervalued and less saturated. My research indicates that entry costs in Southeast Asia are significantly lower, with growth potential that could exceed China within 5 years, I explained. The regulatory environment is also more favorable for our business model. Lars studied me over his wine glass. "The committee prefers established markets with predictable returns. With respect, Mr. Lindgren, predictable returns often mean predictable competition. I wasn't promoted to maintain the status quo." A smile flickered across his face so briefly I almost missed it. "No, you certainly weren't." The waiter arrived with our appetizers. Seared scallops for him, roasted beet salad for me. As we ate, the conversation shifted to safer topics. The unusually cold winter, Lars's recent trip to Tokyo, mutual observations about trends in global logistics. It wasn't until dessert, a chocolate soufflé I agreed to share, that Lars returned to business. "The board will vote tomorrow on the Asian expansion direction," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes intent. "David Harrington supports the China-first approach. He has considerable influence." I set down my spoon, understanding the unspoken message. "You're warning me that my strategy won't be approved. I'm informing you of the political reality." Lars took a precise bite of soufflé. "However, I'm also suggesting that reality can be changed with the right presentation. You want me to convince them. I want you to show the same confidence in that boardroom that you showed when presenting to Transatlantic." He leaned forward slightly. "The committee promoted you because you think differently, Samantha. Don't start playing it safe. Now that you have something to lose." His words struck deeper than he could know. Since my promotion, a small, insistent voice had whispered that I should be grateful, should avoid rocking the boat, should protect what I'd finally achieved. It was the voice of fear, the same fear that keeps so many talented people from reaching their potential. "I appreciate the insight, Mr. Lindgren," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "and the opportunity to defend my strategy." "Good." He signaled for the check. "One more thing. Jonathan Mercer has been appointed strategy director at Horizon. He'll be focusing exclusively on Asian markets." The information landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. If Asundara pursued China while Horizon targeted Southeast Asia, under Jonathan's direction, we could find ourselves outmaneuvered in emerging markets while fighting for scraps in established ones. That's relevant information, I managed, my mind already recalibrating my presentation for tomorrow. I thought it might be. Lars signed the check without looking at the amount. "See you at the board meeting, Director Price. 9 o'clock sharp." That night, I barely slept, revising slides until the numbers blurred before my eyes. By morning, I had completely restructured my presentation, focusing not just on the potential of Southeast Asian markets, but on the strategic danger of following conventional wisdom when competitors were clearly pivoting toward innovation. The boardroom looked different from the presenter's position, less intimidating than I remembered, though no less consequential. 12 board members, including Lars, sat around the same mahogany table where my career had transformed 3 months earlier. David Harrington's expression was pleasant, but guarded as I connected my laptop to the display system. "Good morning," I began, conscious of every eye on me. "Today I'm presenting Asundara's Asian market entry strategy with a particular focus on why our initial targets should be Vietnam and Malaysia rather than China and Japan." For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through market analyses, regulatory comparisons, and competitive intelligence, including, without naming Horizon specifically, the movements of key competitors toward Southeast Asia. I concluded with projected 5-year returns that, while initially lower than a China-first approach, showed substantially higher growth potential by year 3. When I finished, David Harrington spoke first. "An interesting perspective, Ms. Price, but untested. China represents a known quantity with established business protocols. Respectfully, Mr. Harrington, known quantity often translates to saturated market, I countered. Asundara has always positioned itself as an innovator. This strategy aligns with that identity. Innovation carries risk, observed Eliza Dougherty, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp, especially when led by relatively new executive leadership. The comment stung, but I refused to show it. All strategies carry risk, Ms. Dougherty. The question is whether we're risking too little rather than too much. The discussion continued for another 20 minutes. Pointed questions, challenges to my data, concerns about implementation timelines. I answered each one directly, without defensiveness, but without concession on the core strategy. Finally, Lars spoke for the first time. I move we put the Southeast Asia strategy to a vote. David Harrington looked surprised, but nodded. Very well, all in favor of, Director Price's Southeast Asia first approach? Hands rose slowly. Lars first, then Eliza Dougherty, followed by others until 8 of the 12 board members had signaled approval. David Harrington's hand remained down, along with 3 others, but the majority had spoken. The Southeast Asia strategy is approved, David announced, his tone professionally neutral despite his evident disappointment. Implementation timeline to be reviewed quarterly. Thank you, Director Price. As the board moved on to other agenda items, I gathered my materials, a curious lightness spreading through me. This victory felt different from winning the transatlantic contract, more personal, somehow. Not because I'd defeated an opponent, but because I'd advocated for my genuine conviction against significant resistance. I caught Lars's eye as I headed for the door. He nodded slightly. Not quite a smile, but acknowledgement nonetheless. In that moment, I understood that his warning at dinner had been a test as much as a courtesy. He'd wanted to see if I would fight for my strategy or retreat to safer ground. Outside the boardroom, I took a deep breath, recognizing a truth that had been gradually forming over the past 3 months. Leadership wasn't about avoiding conflict or protecting position. It was about having the courage to stand by your vision, especially when it would be easier not to. Jonathan Mercer had taught me to survive, but now, finally, I was learning to lead. Spring came to Atlanta with explosive dogwood blossoms and the sweet scent of magnolias drifting through open windows. 6 months into my role as executive director, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt both challenging and sustainable, a far cry from the perpetual anxiety of my years under Jonathan's supervision. The Southeast Asia strategy was progressing well, with our advance team already securing office space in Ho Chi Minh City and preliminary meetings scheduled with potential Malaysian partners. Each successful step validated the board's decision and, by extension, my leadership. But corporate life, like spring in Georgia, is never without storms. Sam, you need to see this. Tara burst into my office without knocking, her iPad clutched in one hand. She'd recently been promoted to senior strategy analyst, a move that had raised eyebrows among some of Jonathan's remaining loyalists, but had proven itself wise with every project she touched. What am I looking at? I asked as she placed the tablet in front of me, open to what appeared to be a corporate press release. Horizon Partners just announced a merger with Asia Tech Logistics, she said, her voice tight with concern. They're creating a new division focused exclusively on Southeast Asian markets. I scanned the release, my stomach tightening as I absorbed the implications. Asia Tech was a Singapore-based firm with established connections throughout the region. Exactly the kind of partner that could accelerate Horizon's entry into markets we had only begun to explore. And listed as the new division's leadership team was a painfully familiar name, Jonathan Mercer, Executive Vice President of Asian Operations. When was this announced? I asked, scrolling through the details. 20 minutes ago, it's already making rounds in industry circles. Tara leaned against my desk, arms crossed. This has Jonathan's fingerprints all over it. He knew about our strategy shift toward Southeast Asia. The accusation hung in the air between us. Had Jonathan somehow obtained proprietary information about Asundara's plans? Timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Our board approval followed within weeks by Horizon's perfectly positioned acquisition. We need to reassess our timeline, I said, pushing aside questions of corporate espionage for more immediate concerns. If Horizon can leverage Asia Tech's existing relationships, they'll move faster than we anticipated. The next hours dissolved into strategy. Sessions with my core team. We pulled up market analyses, competitor profiles, and implementation schedules, searching for ways to accelerate our entry without sacrificing quality. By evening, we'd drafted a revised approach that compressed our original 12-month timeline into 8 aggressive but achievable months. As the team filed out, Marcus lingered at the door. David Harrington called twice while you were in the strategy session, he said. He wants to see you in his office tomorrow morning at 7:30. The CEO's early morning summons wasn't surprising given the day's news, but it still sent a flutter of apprehension through me. David had voted against my Southeast Asia strategy. Now Horizon's move seemed to validate his concerns about risk and competition. Thanks, Marcus. I'll be ready. After he left, I remained at my desk, staring at the city lights emerging against the darkening sky. The merger announcement played on repeat in my mind, each iteration focusing more sharply on Jonathan's new title, Executive Vice President, a promotion that placed him higher in Horizon's structure than my position at Asundara. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Dinner still? On for tonight? I'd forgotten our plans completely amid the day's chaos. Rain check? I texted back. Work emergency. Her reply came immediately. No way. You've canceled twice already. I'm coming to you. Chinese takeout in your office in 45 minutes. Non-negotiable. I smiled despite myself. Kate had always been the stubborn one. A trait that served her well as a pediatric surgeon but made her a challenging sister when she decided something was for your own good. True to her word, Kate arrived 45 minutes later bearing containers of kung pao chicken, vegetable lo mein, and steamed dumplings. She looked jarringly out of place in my corporate office with her casual jeans and Atlanta Braves sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun that somehow still looked perfect. This place still feels like a movie set, she observed, glancing around at the modern furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows. Hard to believe my little sister has a corner office bigger than my apartment. Your apartment could fit a small country, I countered, helping her arrange the food on my conference table. You just fill it with too many books, says the woman with color-coded filing. Cabinets. She handed me chopsticks and a container of lo mein. So what's the emergency that almost made you cancel on your favorite sister? Again. I explained the Horizon merger as we ate, trying to convey the strategic implications without drowning her in corporate jargon. Kate listened attentively, her surgeon's eyes assessing each detail as if diagnosing a particularly complex case. So, this Jonathan guy, your ex-boss who tried to humiliate you, is now technically higher ranked at a competitor than you are here, she summarized, reaching for another dumpling. And he's targeting the same markets you convinced your board to pursue. That's the situation, I confirmed, impressed as always by her ability to cut through complexity to the essential problem. And tomorrow you have to explain. This to your CEO who didn't want to pursue these markets in the first place. At 7:30 in the morning, Kate nodded thoughtfully. What's your plan? I outlined the accelerated timeline we'd developed, the potential partnerships we were exploring, the competitive advantages we still maintained despite Horizon's merger. The strategy was sound, but even as I explained it, I recognized the defensive posture underlying my approach. React, respond, mitigate damage. You know what I see when I'm in surgery? Kate asked suddenly, interrupting my explanation of supply chain efficiencies. I see problems that need solutions, not competitors I need to beat. I blinked at the apparent non sequitur. This isn't surgery, Kate. No, but it is problem solving. She set down her chopsticks and leaned forward. You're so focused on what Jonathan is doing that you're defining your strategy in relation to his moves. That's still letting him control the game. Her observation struck uncomfortably close to home. So what would you do, Dr. Price? I asked, only half joking. I'd stop playing defense. She shrugged as if it were obvious. In surgery, when complications arise, the worst thing you can do is panic and start reacting to each problem as it appears. You need to step back, assess the whole situation, and sometimes do something completely unexpected. Like what? That's your department, sis. I just cut people open for a living. She gathered the empty containers, stacking them neatly. But I know this. The Samantha who used to help me study for calculus tests by creating ridiculous, memory tricks wouldn't be scrambling to adjust timelines. She'd be figuring out how to change the game entirely. After Kate left, her words lingered. I returned to my desk and opened a blank document, typing a single question at the top. What if we weren't competing with Horizon at all? The question was almost heretical in corporate strategy terms, where competition is taken as a fundamental given. But as I stared at it, possibilities began to form. Approaches that didn't involve racing Horizon to the same markets, but creating entirely new opportunities they hadn't considered. By midnight, I had the outline of a strategy so different from our original plan that it barely resembled traditional market entry. Instead of competing with Horizon for established logistics channels in Southeast Asia, we would focus on creating integrated technology solutions for the region's emerging e-commerce platforms, a space where Asia Tech had no significant presence and Horizon lacked expertise. It wasn't just a reaction to the merger. It was a complete pivot toward Ascendera's strengths and away from the battlefield Jonathan had chosen. I arrived at David Harrington's office the next morning with 2 presentations loaded on my tablet, the accelerated timeline my team had prepared yesterday, and my midnight reimagining of our entire Southeast Asian approach. David was already at his desk, silver hair perfectly groomed despite the early hour, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. His corner office made mine look modest, with views of downtown Atlanta from 2 walls of windows and decades of achievements displayed tastefully on the others. "Samantha," he greeted me, gesturing to a chair. "I assume you've seen the Horizon announcement." "Yes. The merger with Asia Tech positions them as significant competition in Southeast Asia." He nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Some board members are suggesting we reconsider our strategy. Focus on China as originally proposed." "That would be a mistake," I said with more confidence than I felt. "In fact, I believe the merger presents an opportunity rather than a threat." David's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." I set my tablet on his desk and pulled up the second presentation, the one born from Kate's challenge to change the game. "With your permission, I'd like to propose an alternative approach." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the e-commerce integration strategy, explaining how it leveraged Ascendera's technological advantages while avoiding direct competition with the Horizon Asia Tech partnership. David listened without interruption, his expression giving away nothing until I finished. "This is substantially different from what the board approved," he observed finally. "The markets remain the same. The approach has evolved based on changing competitive conditions." I met his gaze directly. "That's what good strategy does." A hint of amusement flickered across his face. "And the fact that this approach completely sidesteps Jonathan Mercer's area of expertise is purely coincidental?" "Not at all," I admitted, surprising both of us with my candor. "It's precisely because I understand how Jonathan thinks that I can see the opportunity he'll miss. He's focused on beating us at the game he knows. I'm proposing we play a different game entirely." David studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Present this to the executive committee this afternoon. If they approve, we'll take it to the board for final authorization." "Thank you," I said, gathering my tablet. As I reached the door, David spoke again. "Samantha," he said, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it, "Lars was right about you." I paused, unsure how to respond to the unexpected comment. "When he first proposed your promotion," David continued, "I had reservations. Not about your capabilities, but about your experience. He said something I've been reflecting on since. Some people need 20 years to learn what others understand instinctively." The compliment, from both Lars and David, left me momentarily speechless. "I appreciate your confidence," I managed finally. "Just don't make me regret it," he replied, his tone returning to its usual crispness. "Executive Committee, 3 o'clock. Be ready for tough questions." As I walked back to my office, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time since the Horizon announcement, I wasn't thinking about Jonathan Mercer at all. I was focused entirely on the future I wanted to create, not the past I needed to overcome. The launch of Ascendera's e-commerce integration platform in Vietnam exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Within 3 months, we'd secured partnerships with 2 of the country's fastest-growing online marketplaces, positioning our technology as the backbone of their logistics operations. Malaysia followed with similar success, and preliminary discussions had begun with retailers in Thailand and Indonesia. Horizon, meanwhile, struggled to gain traction with their traditional logistics approach. The merger with Asia Tech had provided connections but not innovation, and Southeast Asia's rapidly digitizing economy demanded both. Industry publications began questioning the strategy, with one particularly pointed analysis in Supply Chain Quarterly titled, "Horizon's Asian Gambit, Right Partner, Wrong Play?" I didn't take satisfaction in their challenges, at least not much. Corporate strategy isn't a zero-sum game, and markets as vast as Southeast Asia offered plenty of opportunity for multiple players. But I couldn't help feeling validated when Lars forwarded me the article with a simple note. "Vision vindicated. Well done." My 9th month as executive director brought Atlanta's sweltering summer heat and an unexpected invitation: the Global Logistics Summit in Singapore. where I'd been asked to deliver a keynote address on innovation in emerging markets. It was a professional recognition I'd never dreamed possible a year earlier, when I was still retrieving coffee for Jonathan during meetings where I should have been presenting. "You have to take Marcus with you," Tara insisted as I prepared for the trip. We were having lunch in my office, reviewing quarterly results between bites of salad from the building's overpriced cafe. "He's been coordinating with the Ho Chi Minh City team for months, plus he deserves to see his work recognized." "Already arranged," I assured her, passing over an itinerary. "You're coming too. The panel on digital transformation needs your perspective." Tara's eyes widened as she scanned the document. "Sam, I've never presented at an international conference before." Neither had I until Lars threw me into that shareholders meeting, I reminded her. Sometimes the opportunities we don't ask for become the moments that define us. The Singapore summit was held at Marina Bay Sands, its iconic triple towers and rooftop infinity pool, providing a dramatic backdrop for discussions about the future of global trade. Our Ascendara contingent, myself, Tara, Marcus, and 2 team members from our new Ho Chi Minh City office, arrived 2 days early to prepare and adjust to the time difference. On the morning before the conference officially began, I found myself alone at the rooftop pool, watching the sun rise over Singapore's gleaming skyline. The city was already humming with activity 57 floors below, but up here, the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the infinity edge and the occasional rustle of palm fronds in the early breeze. "They say watching the sunrise from this pool is a once-in-a-lifetime experience," said a voice behind me, though I suspect that depends on one's income bracket. I turned to find Lars Lindgren approaching, dressed in casual linen pants and a light blue shirt, the most informal I'd ever seen him. Without his usual tailored suit, he looked almost approachable, though the penetrating intelligence in his eyes remained unchanged. "Mr. Lindgren," I greeted him, suddenly conscious of my wet hair and swimsuit. "I didn't realize you were attending the summit." "I wasn't planning to," he admitted, settling into a lounge chair beside me. "But when I heard you were delivering the keynote, I decided it was worth the trip." The simple statement carried more weight than effusive praise might have from someone else. Lars Lindgren didn't alter his schedule for trivial reasons. "I hope I won't disappoint," I said, meaning it. Despite months of success in my role, part of me still felt like an imposter waiting to be exposed, the lingering psychological aftermath of years under Jonathan's systematic undermining. "You won't." His certainty was matter-of-fact rather than reassuring. "Your team's execution of the e-commerce strategy has been exemplary. The industry has noticed." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sky transition from lavender to pale gold as the sun crested the horizon. Singapore stretched before us, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, a tiny island transformed into a global powerhouse through strategic vision and relentless execution. "I saw the quarterly numbers," Lars said finally. "The Southeast Asia division will exceed initial projections by nearly 30%. The market was ready for our approach," I acknowledged, "and the team has performed brilliantly." "The market is always ready for the right solution," he corrected gently. "The challenge is recognizing what that solution should be. Few leaders can set aside their preconceptions to see opportunities others miss." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emergency call from Atlanta office. Need you ASAP." I excused myself, hurrying back to my room with a growing sense of unease. Marcus was waiting in the suite's living area, his expression grave. "What's happened?" I asked, reaching for the hotel robe. "David Harrington just called. Horizon Partners has filed a corporate espionage lawsuit against Ascendara." He handed me his tablet, open to a legal document. "They're claiming we stole proprietary information about their Asian strategy before developing our e-commerce platform." I scanned the complaint, my alarm growing with each paragraph. The suit specifically named me as the primary defendant, alleging that I had deliberately and maliciously misappropriated confidential strategic information following Jonathan's visit to my office 10 months earlier. "This is absurd," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I never had access to Horizon's plans. If anything, Jonathan was fishing for our strategy during that meeting. "David says the board is calling an II emergency session tomorrow. They want you to return to Atlanta immediately." The timing couldn't have been worse. My keynote was scheduled for the following afternoon, the culmination of months of preparation and the most significant professional platform I'd ever been offered. "I can't leave now," I decided, setting down the tablet. "The keynote is too important for Ascendara's regional Positioning. I'll address the board virtually after the presentation. Marcus looked uncertain. David seemed to think this was urgent. The lawsuit mentions specific technical details of our e-commerce platform that allegedly match Horizon's development plans. That's impossible, I insisted, though a nagging doubt had begun to form. Our approach was developed completely independently. But was it? The midnight inspiration that had led to our e-commerce strategy had come after learning about Horizon's merger with AsiaTech. Could I have unconsciously incorporated something Jonathan had mentioned during his visit? The human mind makes connections in ways we don't always recognize. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of preparation and worry, reviewing my keynote slides while consulting with Asundara's legal team in Atlanta. The lawyers were confident the suit had little merit, a competitive tactic rather than a legitimate claim, but the damage to my reputation and Asundara's credibility could be substantial regardless of the legal outcome. That evening, as I rehearsed my presentation one final time, a knock at my suite door interrupted my concentration. Tara stood in the hallway, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You need to see this," she said, entering without waiting for an invitation. She placed her laptop on the coffee table, opening it to reveal an email with an unfamiliar sender address. It came to my personal account 15 minutes ago. The email contained no message, only an attachment, an audio file with a date stamp from 10 months earlier. I clicked play with a growing sense of foreboding. Jonathan's voice emerged from the speakers. "I came to propose something mutually beneficial, a collaboration rather than competition. Horizon has connections with the European regulatory bodies that Asundara lacks. You have the infrastructure already in place that we're still building." I recognized the conversation immediately. It was from his visit to my office after his departure from Asundara. But the recording continued beyond what I remembered, capturing the sound of my office door closing as he left, followed by what appeared to be Jonathan speaking to someone in the hallway. "She didn't bite. Plan B it is. Make sure the tech specs for the platform are accidentally included in the next board packet. Price is smart. She'll recognize the potential even if she doesn't admit where she got it." The recording ended. Tara and I stared at each other in stunned silence. "He set me up," I said finally, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He wanted me to use their technology specs so they could sue us later." "But you didn't," Tara pointed out. "Our platform architecture is completely different from anything Horizon has developed." "That doesn't matter in court of public opinion," I replied, the implications unfolding rapidly in my mind. "The accusation alone is enough to damage my credibility. And if this goes to trial, it could take years to resolve. So what do we do with this recording?" It was the million-dollar question. The audio file proved Jonathan's intent to manipulate me, but using it would mean admitting someone at Asundara had recorded a private conversation in my office. A potentially serious breach of corporate ethics and possibly law, depending on George's recording consent requirements. "Who sent this to you?" I asked. Tara shook her head. "The email came from an anonymous account, but whoever it was must have access to Asundara's security systems." I considered the implications, the pieces falling into place. Or access to Horizons. Jonathan wouldn't have made this plan alone. He needed someone inside Asundara to plant those specs in the board packet. "A loyalist," Tara agreed. "Someone who stayed behind when he left." The revelation should have been devastating. The knowledge that someone on my team had been working against me all along. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if a fog had lifted to reveal the landscape exactly as it was, not as I'd hoped it to be. "Forward that email to David Harrington and our legal team," I decided, "and get me a secure line to the board meeting tomorrow. I'm still giving that keynote, but afterward we have a different kind of presentation to deliver." As Tara left to make the arrangements, I returned to my keynote slides with renewed focus. Jonathan had tried to undermine me once again, but this time I wasn't fighting alone. And this time I understood what Kate had been trying to tell me all along. The most powerful position isn't attacking or defending. It's changing the game entirely. Tomorrow I would deliver my keynote as planned. And then I would confront the shadows that had followed me from Atlanta to Singapore, not as a victim, but as a leader who refused to be defined by someone else's game. The grand ballroom at Marina Bay Sands hummed with anticipation as attendees filed in for the summit's opening keynote. Over 800 logistics professionals, technology innovators, and industry journalists filled the room, their conversations creating a soft cacophony that bounced off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Digital displays flanked the stage, showcasing the conference theme: Reimagining Global Connection, the Future of Logistics in an Interconnected World. I stood in the wings, watching the crowd settle while trying to calm the storm in my mind. The lawsuit, the recording, the board meeting scheduled immediately after my presentation, all of it swirled beneath the surface of the professional composure I fought to maintain. 5 minutes, Ms. Price, the event coordinator informed me, adjusting her headset. The introduction is about to begin. I nodded, straightening my blazer, a deep teal that Tara had insisted projected both authority and approachability. My notes were loaded on the teleprompter, my slides queued, and ready. Physically, I was prepared. Emotionally was another matter entirely. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, Marcus observed, appearing beside me with a glass of water. Remember to breathe. Breathing isn't the problem, I replied, accepting the water gratefully. It's everything else. Focus on the keynote, he advised. The board meeting will take care of itself. The Rayai. Recording changes everything. Before I could respond, the house lights dimmed, and the conference chair stepped onto the stage to introduce me. Her voice boomed through the sound system, recounting my credentials and accomplishments with the kind of enthusiasm that made them sound more impressive than they felt. Whose innovative approach to Southeast Asian markets has redefined industry. Standards, she concluded. Please welcome Ascendara Group's Executive Director of Global Strategy, Samantha Price. Applause washed over me as I stepped onto the stage, smiling with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The lights were blinding, reducing the audience to silhouettes beyond the first few rows. I took my position at the podium, waiting for the applause to fade before speaking. Thank, you for that generous introduction, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. We gather here today at a pivotal moment in global logistics, a time when technology, market forces, and human ingenuity are converging to transform how we connect the world's economies. The familiar rhythm of the presentation gradually calmed my nerves. I moved away from the podium, walking the stage as I shared insights from Ascendara's Southeast Asian experience, illustrated with case studies and data visualizations that appeared on the screens behind me. The audience leaned in, engaged by both the content and the narrative I wove around it. Halfway through, I spotted him, Jonathan Mercer, seated near the back of the room, his expression unreadable from this distance. His presence shouldn't have surprised me. As Horizon's Executive Vice President of Asian Operations, he had every reason to attend the summit. Still, the sight of him sent a jolt through me, momentarily derailing my train of thought. I recovered quickly, turning his unexpected appearance into fuel rather than distraction. My voice grew stronger, my points sharper. This wasn't just a keynote anymore. It was a declaration of vision that stood in stark contrast to the outdated thinking he represented. The future of logistics in emerging markets isn't about replicating Western models with local modifications, I asserted, building toward my conclusion. It's about recognizing the unique technological leapfrogging these regions have already accomplished and building solutions native to their reality. When we approached Southeast Asia, we didn't ask how to adapt our existing systems to their markets. We asked how their markets could teach us to build better systems. As I delivered my final points, I noticed movement in the audience, Jonathan rising from his seat and slipping out through a side door before the presentation concluded, running away or preparing his next move. Either way, I refused to let it distract me from finishing strong. The applause was thunderous when I concluded, the audience rising in a standing ovation that momentarily overwhelmed the worry that had been my constant companion since receiving news of the lawsuit. For those few seconds, I allowed myself to savor the recognition, not as validation of my worth, but as acknowledgement of the team and strategy that had brought Ascendara success in a challenging market. Backstage, Tara was waiting with a tablet and an expression that mixed pride with urgency. That was incredible, she said, embracing me briefly. The board is assembled and waiting. We have the secure connection set up in the VIP lounge. The transition from public triumph to private crisis was jarring. Minutes after accepting congratulations from conference attendees, I found myself seated before a screen displaying Ascendara's boardroom in Atlanta, where 12 grave faces awaited my explanation. David Harrington occupied the center position, his expression carefully neutral as he acknowledged my presence. Director Price, he began formally, I trust your keynote was well received. It was, thank you, I replied, equally formal. Though I understand we have more pressing matters to discuss. David nodded, glancing down at documents before him. Horizon Partners has filed a lawsuit alleging corporate espionage, specifically claiming you misappropriated proprietary information regarding their technology platform during a meeting with Jonathan Mercer last year. The complaint includes technical specifications they claim match our Southeast Asian e-commerce integration system. I've reviewed the complaint, I confirmed. It's without merit. Our platform was developed independently, based on market research and the expertise of our development team. The recording Ms. Williams forwarded to me suggests Mr. Mercer may have attempted to plant information deliberately, David continued. However, it also raises questions about surveillance within Asundara offices. Do you have any knowledge of who might have recorded that conversation? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. If the recording had been made by an Asundara employee without proper authorization, it could create legal complications of its own, potentially undermining its value in defending against Horizon's lawsuit. I answered honestly. The recording was sent anonymously to Tara's personal email, but I believe it's authentic. The conversation matches my recollection exactly. Lars Lindgren spoke for the first time, his image slightly delayed by the video connection. The timing of this lawsuit is suspicious. Immediately before Ms. Price's keynote at a major industry event, when Asundara's Southeast Asian strategy is being recognized as innovative and successful. Precisely, I agreed. This isn't about protecting intellectual property. It's about damaging my credibility and Asundara's market position at a critical moment. David frowned. Be that as it may, we need to address both the lawsuit and the recording. Our legal team advises settling quickly to avoid prolonged negative publicity. The Dow's suggestion hit me like a blow. Settling would imply guilt, validating Jonathan's fabricated claims and undermining everything we'd built in Southeast Asia. With respect, I countered. Settling sends exactly the wrong message. It suggests there's truth to their allegations when we know there isn't. Our platform architecture is fundamentally different from anything Horizon has developed. The, market doesn't always distinguish between accusation and proof, David pointed out. The damage to our reputation could be substantial if this drags on. I leaned forward, choosing my next words carefully. What if we could prove definitively that our platform was developed independently and that Jonathan deliberately attempted to undermine Asundara through false claims? The board members exchanged glances, their interest piqued. What did you have in mind? David asked. I need 48 hours, I replied. There's someone I need to speak with here in Singapore, someone who might have information that changes everything. It was a gamble based on intuition rather than certainty, but the recording had triggered a suspicion I couldn't ignore. If I was right, Jonathan's carefully constructed trap might become his own undoing. After some debate, the board agreed to my request, delaying any decision on settlement until I could present additional evidence. As the video connection terminated, Tara looked at me with undisguised curiosity. Who exactly are you planning to talk to? She asked. Someone who has access to both Asundara and Horizon's internal systems, I replied, already reaching for my phone. Someone who would know exactly what Jonathan was planning and how to expose it. The next morning found me in the lobby of a boutique hotel in Singapore's Chinatown district, waiting for a meeting that might determine not just my professional future, but Asundara's position in the Southeast Asian market. The space was quiet, with only a handful of guests enjoying the complimentary breakfast or reading newspapers in plush armchairs. I checked my watch, 9:58 a.m. The message I'd sent yesterday had specified 10 nods, leaving no room for explanation or negotiation, just a time, a place, and a promise of mutual benefit. At precisely 10 o'clock, a familiar figure emerged from the elevator and scanned the lobby, his gaze eventually settling on me. Michael Chen, Asundara's former IT security director, who had left abruptly 3 months after Jonathan's departure for what he'd called a new opportunity in Asia. At the time, his resignation had seemed unremarkable, just another transition in a company experiencing significant change. Now, I suspected there was much more to the story. Ms. Price, he greeted me cautiously, remaining standing even as I gestured to the chair opposite mine. Your message was unexpected. So was the recording someone sent to Tara, I replied, watching his expression carefully. A recording that could only have come from Asundara's internal security system, a system you designed. Michael's face revealed nothing, but he finally took the seat I'd offered. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I leaned forward slightly. You left Asundara 4 months after I became executive director. 2 weeks later, you joined Horizon Partners as their head of digital security for Asian operations. What most people don't know is that you and Jonathan Mercer attended the same prep school in Connecticut. You've known each other for over 20 years. His eyebrows rose. Slightly. The first crack in his composed facade. You've done your research. When someone sends explosive evidence anonymously, I make it my business to understand why. I paused, then took a calculated risk. You sent that recording to Tara because Horizon's lawsuit crossed a line, didn't it? You were willing to help Jonathan gather intelligence, maybe even place information where I might find it. But you drew the line at false accusations that could destroy someone's career. Michael was silent for a long moment, his internal debate visible in the subtle tension of his shoulders. Finally, he sighed. Jonathan promised no one would get hurt. It was supposed to be about gaining competitive intelligence, not fabricating evidence. Tell me everything, I said quietly, and I'll make sure you're protected when this all comes out. For the next hour, Michael detailed a scheme more elaborate than I'd imagined. Jonathan had recruited him shortly after being forced out of Ascendara, leveraging their long friendship and the promise of a lucrative position at Horizon. Michael's role had been to monitor my team's communications and strategic planning while still employed at Ascendara, then help Jonathan develop counter-strategies once he joined Horizon. The lawsuit was his idea, Michael explained. When your e-commerce platform succeeded and Horizon's traditional approach failed, he needed a way to discredit both you and the strategy. He manufactured technical specifications that superficially resembled your platform, then backdated internal documents to make it appear these specs existed before your system was developed. And you have proof of this? I asked, trying to keep the urgency from my voice. Michael nodded, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. Everything's here. The original timestamps on the documents before they were altered, emails discussing the lawsuit strategy, even Jonathan's explicit instructions to create a false paper trail. I've been documenting it all for months, ever since I realized how far he was willing to go. I stared at the tiny device that could potentially end the lawsuit and vindicate both me and Ascendara. Why are you doing this? Why turn against Jonathan now? Michael was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting mine again. Because what he's doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal. And because watching how you've led Ascendara for the past year made me realize there's a better way to succeed than tearing others down. He pushed the flash drive across the table. I'll testify if needed. It's time this stopped. As I closed my fingers around the drive, I felt the weight of responsibility it represented, not just for clearing my name, but for ensuring justice was served without destroying more lives than necessary. Thank you, I said simply. Michael stood, adjusting his jacket. For what it's worth, Ms. Price, what you've built in Southeast Asia is remarkable. Even Jonathan knows it, though he'd never admit it publicly. As he walked away, I remained seated, the flash drive warm in my palm. The evidence it contained would likely end Jonathan's career and significantly damage Horizon's reputation. Yet I felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a profound weariness at the energy wasted on corporate warfare that could have been directed toward genuine innovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Tara. Board reconvening in 3 hours. What do you want me to tell them? I glanced at the flash drive once more before replying. Tell them I have what we need, and that I'm ready to end this, on our terms. The settlement conference room at Horizon Partners' Singapore office felt deliberately intimidating. All dark wood, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling financial district. Their legal team occupied one side of the massive table, expressions ranging from smugly confident to professionally blank. Jonathan sat at the center, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, his demeanor radiating the casual arrogance of someone who believed victory was already secured. On our side sat Ascendara's chief counsel, Rebecca Winters, who had flown in overnight from Atlanta, along with David Harrington, Tara, and myself. The contents of Michael's flash drive had transformed our position from defensive to commanding, though we'd chosen not to reveal our advantage until this meeting, a strategic decision that had required considerable restraint. Thank you all for agreeing to this discussion, began Horizon's lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Eleanor Tam. We believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter efficiently. We couldn't agree more, Rebecca replied smoothly, though I suspect our definition of resolution may differ from yours. Eleanor smiled thinly. Ascendara has misappropriated proprietary technology developed by Horizon Partners. Our client is prepared to accept a settlement that includes financial compensation, public acknowledgement of the infringement, and immediate cessation of the e-commerce platform currently operating in Southeast Asia. The demands were even more outrageous than I'd expected, designed not just to extract payment but to cripple our entire regional strategy. Jonathan watched me as his attorney spoke, his expression a careful mask of professional detachment that didn't quite conceal the satisfaction underneath. "Those terms are completely unacceptable," David stated flatly, "and based on allegations that are entirely without merit. We have documented evidence," Eleanor countered, sliding a folder across the table. "Technical specifications that clearly match Asundara's platform, dated months before your system was developed." Rebecca didn't even glance at the folder. Interesting timing on that documentation. Created after Mr. Mercer's departure from Asundara, then backdated, to create the appearance of prior development. Quite sophisticated, though not sophisticated enough to fool forensic analysis. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Jonathan's expression froze, while Eleanor looked momentarily confused. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she said carefully. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Rebecca opened her laptop and turned it toward the Horizon team. "We have extensive evidence that Mr. Mercer orchestrated a deliberate campaign to plant false information, manufacture backdated documents, and file fraudulent legal claims, all constituting criminal conspiracy and corporate fraud." The video playing on her screen showed Jonathan in his Horizon office, instructing Michael Chen to alter technical specifications and timestamps. His voice was crystal clear. "Make sure these look like they were created before Price developed her platform. The dates need to be airtight for the lawsuit to stick." Eleanor quickly reached to close the laptop, but the damage was done. The other Horizon attorneys exchanged alarmed glances, while Jonathan's face drained of color. "That recording was obtained illegally," he protested, finding his voice. "It's inadmissible." "In court, perhaps," David acknowledged. "But we're not in court yet, and there's substantially more evidence, all properly documented and legally obtained by Mr. Chen before he left Horizon's employment." I watched Jonathan as the realization hit him. Michael had betrayed him. His confidant and co-conspirator had turned against him, providing the very evidence that now threatened to destroy everything he'd built at Horizon. "Michael wouldn't," he began, then stopped himself, recognizing the trap of admitting he knew exactly who had provided the evidence. "Here are our terms," Rebecca continued, sliding a document across the table. "Horizon will immediately withdraw the lawsuit with prejudice, issue a public statement acknowledging there was no infringement by Asundara, and agree to a non-disparagement clause regarding Ms. Price and Asundara's Southeast Asian operations." "And if we refuse?" Eleanor asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then we'll file a countersuit for malicious prosecution, defamation, and corporate fraud," Rebecca replied calmly. "With the evidence we possess, including Mr. Chen's testimony, we're confident in our position. The discovery process alone would be enlightening for Horizon's board and shareholders." The implied threat was clear. A protracted legal battle would expose not just Jonathan's actions, but potentially broader ethical issues within Horizon's corporate culture. The financial and reputational damage could be catastrophic. Eleanor whispered urgently with her colleagues while Jonathan sat immobile, his career visibly crumbling before my eyes. I should have felt triumph, vindication, even pleasure at watching the man who had tried repeatedly to destroy me finally face consequences for his actions. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, the hollow victory of winning a game that should never have been played. "May I have a moment to speak with Ms. Price?" Jonathan asked, suddenly breaking the tense silence. "Privately." His request startled everyone at the table. David looked at me questioningly, clearly concerned about allowing such a conversation. But something in Jonathan's expression, a resignation I'd never seen before, made me nod my agreement. 5 minutes, Rebecca stipulated, in the adjacent conference room with the door open. Jonathan and I moved to the smaller room next door, taking seats across from each other at a round table designed for more collaborative discussions than the confrontation occurring next door. For several seconds, he simply studied me, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you just destroy me?" he asked finally. "You have everything you need." The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You could have gone public with Chen's evidence, had me arrested for fraud, forced Horizon to fire me publicly." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Instead, you're offering terms that let me save face, at least partially." I considered his question carefully. Why hadn't I pushed for his complete destruction? The thought had certainly crossed my mind during the darkest moments after learning of the lawsuit. Because this isn't about you, Jonathan, I answered honestly. It never was. It's about allowing good work to speak for itself, without the distraction of personal vendettas. He nodded slowly, as if processing a concept foreign to his understanding. You know, I never thought you'd succeed, he admitted. Even after Lindgren promoted you? I was convinced you'd crumble under the pressure. I know. But you didn't. You flourished. Built something I couldn't match, even with Asiatech's connections. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe that's what I couldn't forgive. The admission, the closest to an apology I would likely ever receive, hung between us. 5 years of psychological warfare, culminating in this quiet moment of reluctant acknowledgement. We should get back, I said, rising from my chair. They'll be waiting. Jonathan stood as well, but paused before we reached the door. One last question. How did you know it was Chen? He was always careful. I didn't know for certain, I admitted. But I remembered something my sister once told me about surgery. Sometimes the person who knows exactly where to cut is the same one who knows how to heal. Michael understood both companies, systems intimately. He was the logical connection. Jonathan nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his features before the mask of professional composure returned. We rejoined the others without another word. The settlement was finalized within the hour, terms exactly as Rebecca had outlined, with the additional stipulation that Jonathan would take a leave of absence from Horizon to pursue other opportunities. He signed without protest, his signature a surrender more than an agreement. As we gathered our materials to leave, Jonathan approached me one final time. What will you do now? He asked quietly. With Southeast Asia, I mean. Exactly what we planned from the beginning, I replied. Build something that matters. He nodded, more to himself than to me, and walked away without looking back. Outside Horizon's offices, the Singapore afternoon was oppressively humid, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes every movement an effort. David, Rebecca, and Tara had gone ahead to arrange our return to Atlanta, leaving me momentarily alone on the sidewalk as I waited for our car. My phone buzzed with a text from Lars. Litigation resolved satisfactorily. Well done. Board meeting Monday to discuss expansion into Indonesia and Philippines. Safe travels. Business as usual. No dramatic congratulations or emotional validation, just acknowledgement and the expectation of continued performance. And somehow, that felt exactly right. The car arrived, sleek and black against the colorful backdrop of Singapore's architecture. As I settled into the back seat, the driver asked, Marina Bay Sands, Ms. Price? Yes, I confirmed. And then to the airport. As we pulled into traffic, I watched the city flow past my window, a testament to strategic vision and relentless execution. In less than 24 hours, I would be back in Atlanta, preparing for Monday's board meeting, advancing plans for further expansion, building on the foundation we'd established in Vietnam and Malaysia. The lawsuit, the recording, Jonathan's schemes, all of it would fade into corporate history, lessons learned rather than defining moments. What would remain was the work itself, the strategy and execution that had transformed Asundera's position in one of the world's most dynamic regions. 1 year ago, I had sat alone at a mahogany table, holding an empty folder while shareholders watched me with skepticism and disdain. Jonathan had intended that moment to break me, to confirm what he'd spent years trying to establish, that I wasn't executive material, that I didn't belong at the table. Instead, it had become the catalyst for everything that followed. Not because Lars had rescued me with an unexpected promotion, but because I had been prepared when opportunity arrived. The strategies were mine. The vision was mine. The execution, with my carefully selected team, was mine. Jonathan hadn't understood that trying to erase me had only made me more determined to leave a mark that couldn't be erased. As the car approached Marina Bay Sands, my phone rang, Kate calling from Atlanta. So, she demanded without preamble, is it over? It's over, I confirmed. Settlement. Signed. Lawsuit withdrawn. Jonathan taking a leave of absence that everyone understands is permanent. Did you eviscerate him completely or leave him with a shred of dignity? She asked, only half joking. I smiled, remembering our conversation 9 months earlier over Chinese takeout in my office. I changed the game, I told her, just like you suggested. That's my sister, she said, proudly. Mom wants to know if you're still coming to Sunday dinner when you're back. Wouldn't miss it. After we hung up, I looked up at Marina Bay Sands looming above me, 3 towers supporting a rooftop that seemed to defy gravity, a structure that shouldn't work, but somehow did. Like my career, like the past year, like the future stretching before me, undefined but full of possibility. The doorman opened my car door, greeting me by name, a small courtesy that still surprised me. As I walked through the lobby toward the elevators, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished marble walls. Confident, composed, unmistakably in my element. Never let someone else's fear of your brilliance dim your light, I whispered to myself, words I would later share when interviewed for Forbes' Women Reshaping Global Logistics feature. They may try to erase your voice from the room, but when you're prepared, when you lead with truth and consistency, your silence speaks louder than their noise. And when your moment comes, you won't have to demand your seat at the table. It will already be engraved with your name. The elevator doors opened, welcoming me upward.